Germany is one of the most popular countries to visit in Europe, so if you're planning a trip there, it can feel a little bit overwhelming if you don't know a whole lot about the country besides, that's where Berlin and Munich and Frankfurt are. And hey, there's an Oktoberfest. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing some of my travel tips for traveling around in Germany that I think will be useful, especially if it's your first time in Germany. If at any point you have questions or you feel like I missed something, just, leave a comment and I can get back to you there, or maybe it'll inspire a whole new video. That's the beauty of this whole YouTube business, is that it doesn't have to end with this. We can keep this going, And in case you're new here, I do feel like I should introduce myself so you know why the heck you're paying attention to this guy. My name is Joe Bauer. I'm an American and recently naturalized German citizen who's been living in Germany for the past 8 years, Dusseldorf for 3 years, Berlin for 5 years. I make videos and short documentaries about travel, trail running, outdoor adventures. Sometimes I make some short food documentaries as well. And if any of that interests you, hey, good news, you're basically already on my channel, so just go look around. Have some fun. All right, so let's get started. If you're coming from overseas, you're gonna be landing in one of the airports. Contrary to what you might think, Berlin is not the main airport, although it is the capital city. Frankfurt and Munich are usually going to be the easiest connections to get to Germany. But wherever you land, whether it is Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Dusseldorf, Cologne, Munich, basically anywhere you would be coming from overseas, once you get here, it's very easy to travel around. I'm just going to get this out of the way because I feel I'm speaking primarily to a US audience, and a lot of people think that once you get here, how do I get a car? I gotta rent a car. And I get that because in the US, it is very car-centric and it is difficult to get around without a car in a huge chunk of the country. But just listen to me, folks. You don't need a car here. You really don't. And some people might pop into the comments and say, oh, but if I wanna go see these million things on this random disconnected route, okay, sure. I guess maybe you could use a car. But when I think about how much renting a car costs and all of the, we get the insurance and, having to fuel it and just the added stress to driving around in an unfamiliar place, if you kind of add that up and put that against, the ease of travel in Germany without a car, because you've got the high-speed rail network, you've got regional trains, you've got trains within a lot of the cities, trams, subways, buses. It's so easy to travel around the country that sure, you can go out of your way and plan some ridiculous route where public transit might not be the fastest way, but for the most part, high-speed rail is gonna get you across the country so much faster than driving a car, and you're not gonna have to be stressed about it. I can already hear some people wanting to jump into the comments and leave some complaints about Deutsche Bahn, but don't worry, I'm gonna talk about that now too. So Deutsche Bahn is the main rail provider across the country, and from an American perspective, I love it. Like, I love my Deutsche Bahn. I feel so lucky and giddy each and every time I get on the train, and can't believe that this is my life now, that I can just go around across the country, across Central, Western, Eastern Europe, all by train, and for the most part not have any problems. And it could be a bit more affordable sometimes, but as long as you plan, it can be affordable and it's just easy breezy for the most part. That said, anecdotally, and actually I don't even think it's just anecdote, I think there's data behind this now, Deutsche Bahn has been on the struggle bus, or struggle train I guess, lately. It's been having issues with delayed trains. It's just something to keep in mind, but the main thing is to plan in advance, because Deutsche Bahn can get really expensive, especially the high-speed trains, if you wait to the last minute. You can't just show up in the country and be like, oh, we're gonna go to Munich in a couple of days, and you're in Dusseldorf or you're in Berlin, and think that that's not gonna be a very expensive ticket. If you know your dates because you've booked an overseas flight, then just get on those train tickets. I would just get those off your plate so you don't have to worry, because if you do plan in advance, the train can be wildly affordable. You can get some of those early tickets for journeys across the country from like Berlin to Frankfurt, for example, or Berlin to Munich, and it can be like 20 euros. It can be very affordable as long as you plan, because that's a big cultural thing here, as you'll learn throughout this video. Germany likes to plan. But besides that, there is also Flixbus and there's Flixtrain. I'll be honest, I've never actually ridden on Flixtrain. It's not high speed, and that's not the reason I haven't ridden it. I honestly just sometimes forget because whenever I'm booking train travel, I just go to the Deutsche Bahn website. But there is Flixtrain. I do hope to try it out sometime in the near future. You know, if you're not in a big hurry, you can do things like Berlin to Hamburg, and maybe that'll be a bit more affordable than taking the high-speed train. And that's something else to keep in mind too, because there's a lot of regional trains, they call them Regiobahn, that can be just within a state or, as the name indicates, within a region. And those tickets will be a lot more affordable. And sometimes you can actually, and this gets to what I was saying before about how the high-speed train makes a lot more stops than maybe the high-speed trains in other countries. Sometimes the Regiobahn can be just as fast as the high-speed train. I was recently in Dusseldorf and I took a Regiobahn to Aachen, and it was, if I remember correctly, basically the same time of travel as if I would have taken, the high-speed train from Dusseldorf to Aachen. So if you go to bahn.de, you can find the English section, you can look up your routes, and it'll show you, how long they take, basically any information that you could possibly need. And then once you're in whatever city or destination you're visiting, there's going to be a local transportation service. This can be a little bit difficult to figure out on the fly. The easiest thing to do is you can buy all local public transportation tickets on Deutsche Bahn as well. So, BVG is the transportation system in Berlin. You would think that it's completely separate, but you can, on the Deutsche Bahn app or just on the Deutsche Bahn website, you can buy local public transportation tickets. If you're going to be here for a while, you can also buy regional tickets so that you could have unlimited transportation within a region, a state, what have you. Or you can go ahead and get the Deutschland ticket, which gives you free, unlimited access to all, basically the easiest way to put it is to all non-high-speed public transportation. So Regiobahns, local public transportation, you're all covered with the Deutschland ticket. That's currently 49 euros per month. So you could just buy it for 1 month, depending, how long your trip is. But it is actually going to be a little bit more expensive next year. I think they're talking about 56 euros. So just something to keep in mind. But it can be worthwhile if you're going to be doing lots of regional travel during your trip to Germany. Last thing I'll talk about in terms of travel before we finally move on is Schengen. Schengen is a region within Europe where ostensibly you can cross an international border and you don't need to do any kind of passport check. You don't need to wait in line. You don't need to do anything. It's just like crossing the street. I've done it countless times where I'd be on a hike or a trail running or what have you, or just traveling on a bus, on a train. You cross the border. You don't even know it. Maybe if you're peeking out the window, you'll see a sign, but for the most part, it's simple. It's beautiful. It makes you feel. It's like getting the advantages of traveling around the US where you've got a massive country and everything's just states, obviously not checking across states, but then you still get those cool cultural differences, linguistic differences by traveling across all the different countries in Europe. All right, that's enough about travel. Now let's move on and talk about hotels. I won't talk about this too long, but basically all I wanted to say about hotels is that in general, if you're in cities, medium-sized towns, just basically not villages. In dwarfs, you're going to be finding a lot more guest houses, B&Bs, that kind of thing. When you're in the cities, obviously Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, etc., and a lot of medium-sized towns and cities, Erfurt, Eisenach, and so weiter, you're not gonna have any problem finding standard hotels. You'll find some chains in case you have points and you want to try to use your points or whatever. But for the most part, you're not going to have a problem finding hotels anywhere in the country. When you go to more rural parts of the country, perhaps you're doing a hiking trip or some kind of, bike packing excursion, this is where if you get to some really small, little tiny dwarfs, villages, you might only have the option of getting a guest house or a B&B. That's totally fine. This is where, and we're going to be talking, I believe, next about language, so we might just slide right into that, talking a little bit about language barriers. Again, like I was saying, hotels in the cities, I'll be fine. Similarly, English is spoken very well across the tourism sector. Now, I hear a lot of people say things like, oh, you don't need to speak German in Germany. That's true insofar as if you're only going to be dabbling within the hospitality and tourism sector where people learn English as part of their career. Obviously, a lot of people speak English outside of just tourism, but my point is if you go to smaller rural areas, you'll find a lot of places where unless you speak German, or at least a little bit of German, it can be, I don't know if I want to say challenging. People are nice, they'll help you out, but it's definitely helped me a lot in my travels around smaller places where I've gone on hiking trips. It's helped me a lot to be able to communicate in German. It's just made things a lot easier because people get frustrated when you're not able to communicate. So kind of overlapping the whole hotel and language conversation, that's just something to keep in mind. If you're staying in a village and you're gonna have to stay in a B&B or a guest house, that your host might not speak English. And you can see this if you do like what they call a Ferienwohnung. That's basically just, it's like an Airbnb, but not necessarily on Airbnb. They have their own websites. A lot of people use Vrbo, VRBO.com, and you can find all kinds of vacation rentals. And people who own places there, I found, might not speak English. And obviously the websites, you can use translation to communicate with them, and it's easy breezy. I did that when we first moved here and my German was, so. Now I feel comfortable and I can just take care of that. And I've had it happen before when hosts realize that I can speak German, feel like a little bit of a relief. But again, if you're going to cities or you're going to popular towns and villages in the country, like basically like anywhere that's near, like, I don't know, Neuschwanstein, the Disney castle, you're gonna still also find a lot of English there. So for the most part, if you don't speak any German, you're gonna be fine. But if you like learning languages, like I really like dabbling in a language before going to a new country, learning some pleasantries could be nice, it could be good. And if you want to ask somebody if they speak English, and now this is gonna get to the cultural differences, it's more polite to say, sprechen Sie ein bisschen English? Do you speak a little bit of English? This is because Germans and German culture, it's very particular and all or nothing. And what I mean by that is, if you ask somebody, do you speak English? What they're hearing is, am I 120 bajillion% proficient and fluent? And I wouldn't even say that, I don't know if I would say that for English for me, let alone speaking a foreign language. So they can just be very particular about that. But do you speak a little bit of English? Oh, well, yeah, I speak, that sentence is true. I speak a little bit of English. And that's why it's a little bit more polite to not assume that they speak 100% fluent English. Although I have had it happen where when I first moved here, I'd be like, oh, sprechen Sie ein bisschen English? And then they would speak better English than I would, but say, no, I don't speak that much English. There's a little bit of, I don't know if it's false humility or just actual honest to God humility, but sometimes people downplay their language abilities when they speak English a lot better than certain American politicians I know. Before we move on to the cultural differences, I want to talk just a little bit about food. If you are vegetarian or vegan, you might have this, very meaty idea of Germany in your head. You're not wrong. Things like pork knuckle are a thing here, but as far as I'm concerned, and I've been vegetarian for, I don't know, 5-ish years or so. As far as I'm concerned, Germany is, as a country, one of the easiest places to travel around that I've ever been to as a vegetarian, despite the fact that there is a lot of big, heavy meat dishes out there. It's not uncommon in small rural places. Like, I've gone hiking in Bavaria and, reached a little Hütte restaurant a couple of times, and they had vegetarian options. It's, I've had chili, vegetarian chili or vegan chili, and there'll be things that aren't vegan, vegetarian, but they are vegetarian, like Käsespätzle. These things are out there, so I've never had a problem. You can get good salads, nice fresh salads as well. Risotto is a big thing to give vegetarians. But then once you're in the cities, especially Berlin, I always say Berlin is like the vegan, vegetarian, paradise, Valhalla, at least in the Western world. You have vegan restaurants galore, vegetarian restaurants, vegan bakeries, vegan, vegetarian groceries. There's just so many options that you're not going to go hungry. And then even at restaurants that aren't exclusively vegan or vegetarian, they will almost always have a salad, vegetarian, or vegan option on the menu. So that's nothing that you actually have to worry about. I would still, if you want to ease your nerves, you could do a little bit of research beforehand to look at whatever cities you're going to, look on Google Maps, look for some old blog articles. A lot of people have written about this stuff, so the information's out there if you want to get it. All right, now let's talk about some of the cultural differences that you might experience during your first trip to Germany. The first thing I'll talk about is the correcting culture. Generally speaking, everything's in general. There's always going to be an exception to the rule. So I don't want somebody to jump in the comments and be like, that's not what I've experienced. These are all purposefully generalities to help people who are coming to Germany for the first time. There's a little bit of a correcting culture here. There's a lot of a correcting culture here. Generally speaking, in Germany, it is not rude to correct somebody if you perceive them as doing something wrong. Obviously, there are Germans who do think this is rude and it's annoying and you kvetch about it when you go away. But for the most part, and it's happened to us a lot, where people will correct us on something that they think we're doing wrong. This isn't like a breaking a law kind of thing. This is just, hey, I see you doing something that is not the way I would do it, so I'm going to correct you. This can be wildly frustrating and annoying if you are not from that culture, but I have seen some Germans say that they actually appreciate it, because from their perspective, if I'm doing something wrong or if I'm speaking incorrectly, I would want somebody to tell me. So that's something that I've always perceived as a big difference between, where I come from in the US, where it can be rude to basically tell other people what to do or that you're doing something wrong, or to correct them when they're not bothering you. For as much as the US culture can be portrayed in Europe as too much in your face, too much small talk and all this stuff trying to get to know you, I do think for the most part that we kind of, believe in minding your own business. Whereas here, that's not necessarily a thing. If somebody sees that you're doing something wrong, they're gonna let you know. So just be prepared for that, potentially. Now moving right on down the list, making reservations. If you show up to a restaurant on a Friday night or Saturday night and say, hey, can I get a couple of seats, please? You're gonna be asked, certainly gonna be asked, do you have a reservation? Haben Sie eine Reservierung? And when you say no, you might still get a spot, but you also might get this face of intense loathing and disdain, like, how dare you show up here without a reservation and think that there's going to be space for you. And then, there might end up being space. So that's something to consider in your kind of day by day as you're either planning your trip in advance or if you're being a little bit more spontaneous. Usually when we're traveling around in Germany, we're looking up where we're going to dinner pretty early in the day, like maybe after breakfast or around lunchtime, so that we can call and say, hey, can we make a reservation for 2 people at this time? Again, it's not to say that you can't get a seat somewhere if you don't make a reservation, but it's a stress reliever to just know, I got a reservation, we're good. Because it can happen, especially in a small town where there's only 1 or 2 nice restaurants or decent restaurants, that they're gonna be booked up, especially if it's, the summer or a popular travel time, and then you're gonna be stuck going to get, takeout somewhere or some kind of fast food option. And you don't want that, you wanna eat nice, you're on vacation. And since we're on the topic of food, we'll talk a little bit about Nur Bargeld. You might see signs in some restaurants that say Nur Bargeld, which means cash only. Germany has a stereotype, and it's mostly true, that it is very much a cash-first country. There's lots of historical reasons for that, as far as I understand. The pandemic changed that a little bit, and cards became much more widely accepted. Now in Berlin, for the most part, anywhere I go is going to accept a card. There are still some more old school places that are going to say Nur Bargeld. I'm thinking of old German pubs, restaurants, that kind of thing. But for the most part, anywhere we go is going to take card, and especially at hotels, they're always going to take card. And I think that was true before the pandemic as well, just because of how much you're spending. But if you're traveling around in small rural areas or villages or even medium-sized town, you still might find restaurants that are going to say Nur Bargeld. So just be prepared for that. Make sure that you've got some euros on you, and worst case, hopefully your phone has data, or you can connect to the Wi-Fi so you can look up the closest ATM. Another big cultural difference is Ruhetag. Sunday is Ruhetag here, and that means basically that the grocery stores are going to be closed. I think the whole Ruhetag thing gets a little bit overblown. I've had people, when we were first visiting Europe or moving here, people were like, remember, Sunday is Ruhetag, nothing's going to be open. Everything was going to be quiet. No. I just don't find that to be true. I do think anecdotally that at least in Germany, people wake up a bit slower here, and it can be very quiet on a Saturday or Sunday morning. But on Sundays, restaurants are still open, coffee shops are still open, museums are open. It's just the grocery stores and shops. And maybe this doesn't bother me as much because, the grocery store being closed one day a week, not a big deal. We've gotten used to it. We do our shopping beforehand. And do I look like I go shopping? Like, shopping is not like one of my pastimes. So it's just something I've never worried about or nothing that's ever bothered me. But when I first heard about Ruhetag, I had this idea that it's like a zombie apocalypse. You're going to see a ball of hay just bouncing up and down the street. That's not the case. You see a lot of people out on a Sunday. It just means that grocery stores and shops are closed. But it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're staying in a Ferienwohnung, a vacation rental, where you need to cook for yourself in the vacation rental. Obviously, you can go to restaurants, but if you don't want to have to do every meal out, it's good to know that you have to go to the grocery store on Saturday, get a few things, and you can do that at home, cook for yourself at home on Sunday. The exception to this is at main train stations, the Hauptbahnhof, and sometimes some other major train stations like the one at Alexanderplatz in Berlin. Little grocery stores or an actual big grocery store, those will be open on Sundays, but I wouldn't count on that on like a smaller town like that. You can go to the main train station to find a grocery store open. Obviously, Google Maps is your friend. You can use that to figure everything out, but that's one thing that's different between the US and Germany. There is this whole Ruhetag concept, the idea that it should be a quiet, easy breezy day. So if you do feel like you're gonna need some groceries, just know that you should probably get them on Saturday and not Sunday, unless you wanna be running around looking for a Hauptbahnhof grocery store. Oh, jumping back a little bit to the whole Bargeld thing, the last thing I wanna mention about, restaurants and paying and whatnot is the whole tipping culture. Tipping is not expected here, but in general, you can add like 5 to 10% if you want. It's not expected. Usually what I'll do is probably around 5 to 10%, or if I'm buying a coffee, I'll probably just round it up and you could say stimmt so, and stimmt so, that basically means that the amount I gave is what I'm paying, you keep the rest, and that's fine. If you do want to give a tip and you're paying with card at a restaurant, you just say how much total you want to pay, and that covers everything. So they'll come over with their little computer thing, and they'll tell you this is the total. If it's, say it's 35 euros, and you could say, make it 40, and they'll say, oh, okay, thanks, and then that's it, or say however much you want to make it. But again, it's not expected. Now, just a couple of other cultural differences to touch on. Tap water. Tap water, much to my dismay, is not freely given out at restaurants. In fact, sometimes you'll get a hard time if you ask for Leitungswasser or tap water, or you might even get a little passive-aggressive, tiny little shot glass that they'll put just a little bit of tap water in, and you're like, really? I do think some places are getting a little bit better about this, especially if you go to a brewery. They seem to be more inclined to actually give you a proper glass of tap water. But if you're coming from the US, where it's very common to get like this ginormous glass of water, a lot of things with ice in it, that's just not a thing here. They expect you to order water with gas, Sprudelwasser, or just normal still water, but in a bottle. Probably actually one of my most nitpicky things about German culture that I've had to adapt to, because I love water, but I just bring my own bottle now with me to restaurants. I got my big water bottle that I fill up, bring it to the restaurant, keep it under the table. I've never gotten in trouble with it. So if you're like me and you want always worried about hydration, you want to stay hydrated, just fill up your water bottle at the hotel and bring it with you. Now let's talk about beer. Beer is a big German thing. You think Germany, you think beer. It's been very interesting living here and kind of having some of my pre-existing conceptions of German beer culture challenged. I came from the US at a time when craft beer was really booming, so you had all these different varieties of beer. But in Germany, they have lots of different styles of beer, and you can go to a beer store and get different varieties. But for the most part, people are only drinking what the beer is of their region. So when I lived in Dusseldorf, that was Altbier. You ordered Altbier whenever you went to a bar and you said beer, you got an Altbier. In Cologne, that'd be Kolsch. Anywhere you go in Cologne, you go to a restaurant, you say, I want a beer, it's gonna be a Kolsch. When I lived in Dusseldorf, I did really appreciate this tradition. Sometimes I did miss the variety, but you can still go get the variety. Craft beer is, I think you just say officially is popular here as well. And I have my favorite craft brewery that I go to in the neighborhood, Brueggear. I actually made a video where I interviewed the owner if you want to check that out. But sometimes I do just want like an old German bar experience, and I'll go get a Hefeweizen or I'll go get a Pilsner if it's a hot day. One thing I want to mention on the topic of beer is that there's a font. So sometimes you will pay for a beer, maybe you're going to a sporting event or whatever, and you might be surprised by the price tag, but they put a little font, which is basically like an extra price that they put on there. You'll get that money back if you bring the bottle or whatever you are drinking out of. If you bring it back to them, they'll give you like €2 back or whatever the font is. But it's basically to cover their costs, so that if you don't bring it back, then you basically bought it. And that's not like it's frowned upon. We'll talk in a second here about festivals and the Christmas markets. And it's very common to go to a Christmas market and they have all these unique, stylish mugs that people are drinking Glühwein out of. And sometimes people actually want to keep the cup. So, they pay the font and they just don't give it back. They keep the extra money you paid, and that was basically you just buying a mug. And since we're talking about, let's just keep on the whole festival track. Festivals are a big thing in Germany. You know about Oktoberfest. That's definitely the most popular festival in Germany. And to even talk about Oktoberfest would be a whole separate thing. But yes, Oktoberfest is a thing. I guess the only thing that I'll mention in this kind of overview video is that remember that it usually happens mostly in September, not actually October. So if you want to plan a trip to Germany for Oktoberfest, don't show up like in late October and wondering like, why is the party either gone or really dying down? You want to get here in September. But there are a lot of other festivals as well. Christmas markets are probably the second most well-known or popular festival-y thing that you can get in Germany. A lot of people like coming to, Dresden or some small villages or whatever to experience Christmas markets. Personally, not my jam. I don't personally really like them too much, and maybe that could be another video where I could talk about why Christmas markets just aren't my jam, but people do love them. I can't deny that. People really like their Christmas markets. You got all these little huts. You can go get some food and Glühwein, and as long as you don't mind the cold and the darkness, and that's a perfectly fine way to spend your time in Germany. Winter is not my favorite time to be in Germany, I'll just be honest. I really like summer, except we've been having some hot summers lately because of climate change. But for the most part, summer in Berlin is like the best experience ever. Late spring is very nice too, especially after you get that like whole time jump and we get longer days. And fall, I love fall, especially when you get the nice crisp fall hiking weather. Love it. So winter's not my jam, but a lot of people do love the Christmas markets. So that is a thing. If you want to see Christmas markets, any city, town, village is gonna have one. Besides that, there's a lot of wine festivals. Don't forget that there's a big German wine culture, especially in like Southwest Germany, but not even just Southwest Germany, in the whole Saxon, Switzerland area, you can find some wine culture there as well. In fact, if anything, wine culture I think is growing in Germany, not getting smaller. You can find all kinds of really nice, fun local wine festivals where they'll have a Weinkönigin, which is basically some local teenager who's been elected the wine queen and will have the little sash in it. It's very quaint, I'll say. It's very quaint. And besides, you got the Oktoberfest, you got the Christmas markets, you got the wine festivals. There's all sorts of other regional festivals for pick your flavor. And I'll actually throw a little plug for one of my favorite festivals is Yiddish Summer Weimar. Basically in Weimar, Germany, they have, I think it's like for a whole month about all these Yiddish language workshops, klezmer music, and besides the workshops you can come if you actually want to learn the dance, the language, the music, there's all sorts of performances. And I think that's a really cool thing, especially given, the very obvious history that you have here in Germany. I know that I really appreciate that you can see living, breathing, vibrant Jewish culture in the 21st century in Germany. All right, now let's talk about something that I didn't originally have on my list of things to talk about for this video, Bundesliga. Bundesliga is if you don't know, it's the football federation for German professional soccer. You got all kinds of leagues within that and teams just all across the country in different leagues. If you want to go to a Bundesliga game, it's not like in the US if you want to go to your local baseball game or basketball game or what have you. It's a little bit more similar to the NFL where, depending on the team, tickets are likely to be sold out. But in the US, there's a big secondhand ticket market. Like there's things like StubHub, for example, and it's not uncommon to buy tickets. I use StubHub to go to Browns games because who wanted to go to a Browns game who's ever wanted to go to a Browns game basically since I've been an adult. God help them. But I remember it'd be like, Sunday morning and the Browns are going to play in a few hours and I look on StubHub, I'm like, oh, it's like $16 whatever, because people are trying to get rid of these. Like, I don't want to come downtown. I live downtown, so sometimes I would just pop over for a Browns game. That is wildly frowned upon in Germany, as I've recently learned. I'll try to give a short story about my recent Bundesliga experience, and if you want a separate video where I talk a little bit about more German football culture, I'd be into that. Just let me know. But in short, I've been to Bundesliga before. When we were in Dusseldorf, we saw Fortuna Dusseldorf, and I remember it being a pretty easy breezy experience, much more similar to the US. Games coming up, I buy a ticket and we went, and it was a lot of fun. For whatever reason, since we've been in Berlin, we have not gone to a Bundesliga match, and I really wanted to change that. Like, I wanted to have a local team to cheer for, and there are lots of teams in Berlin, but the two biggest ones are FC Union and Hertha. Because I wanted to start taking an interest in it, I read up on the histories, and I was just, for various reasons, drawn to the history of FC Union. It's more seen as the east side of Berlin team. We live on the east side, so I was like, I want to go to a game. Let's go to a game. In the US, generally speaking, you've got the whole schedule. You can pick whatever game, buy a ticket, boom, you're done. That's not how it works here. Basically, tickets only show up for games that are coming up like in the very near future. So sometimes not even, until days or maybe a couple weeks before the match is actually supposed to happen. So that was probably my first mistake, because I was trying to buy, I think, too far in advance. And from as far as I could tell, it was sold out. And most likely it was. So FC Union has a very large fan base. It's growing because they've had some good years recently. Not so much last year, but they've been really having a lot of good years. They went up into the first league of Bundesliga, so they've really been growing, but they have a very small stadium. So they sell out very easily. And I learned that there is this whole membership system. If you want to have access to tickets, like, first up, you got to be a member. You've got to ideally you get season tickets. If you don't get season tickets, then at least you're a member. You can have access to single game tickets, or if it's sold out because of season tickets or any other reason, you could get put into a lottery, and then all these things that you just don't ever think about in the US. And I'll just give a quick disclaimer, not saying one is better than the other, because like I said before, people have very strong opinions about this, and people really like the Bundesliga way of doing things in general. They feel that by keeping out the casual fan, like somebody who, like you, that might just be traveling for funsies and like, oh, I want to go see a Bundesliga game, that sounds like fun. They're really preserving the culture for those who are upset. Like, this is their club, this is their life. They're preserving that atmosphere. And it's true, like, if you go to a Bundesliga match, like, the whole European soccer stereotype is there of fans chanting and cheering, waving flags the entire time. And it is an atmosphere that I really enjoy. I've seen it replicated even in the MLS when I went to a Chicago Fire game. And that's actually what got me into professional soccer as a fan, was seeing that atmosphere. And they would argue that they're protecting it by limiting tickets to club members and people who already have this history built in with the club. So I'm not doing a good job of making this short, but basically I went and bought tickets on StubHub for the match because I thought it was sold out, and this is a big no-no, I later learned. And once we got to the stadium, we were following the signs for our sector, and it wasn't until I was there that I realized we'd accidentally bought tickets for the visiting section. And the visiting section, we learned, is quarantined off from everything else. You can't walk to any other part of the stadium. So I had this whole day planned in my head. I was like, oh, we're going to go to the FC Union game. We're going to go to the team shop. We're going to become real fans, and it's going to be our team in the city. Not so much. We had to go walk all the way around the stadium to the visiting section. I was wearing a red shirt, which is Union's colors, but for some reason they let me through. The visiting team, Hoffenheim, was wearing blue, and so in theory they should have stopped me and be like, you're not a Hoffenheim fan. You shouldn't be here. Probably not safe. In this case, Hoffenheim fans are very chill, but with other teams, if you're going to be mingling with like the diehard supporters who are going to travel across the country, you probably wouldn't want to mix it up with them. So Melly and I get through, a little disappointed that we ended up where we were, but whatever, we're going to make the most of it. But like 10 minutes later, our other friends text and say that they won't let them through, that they think the tickets are fake. To make a long story short, they gave us all sorts of reasons as to why they didn't let us in. Our tickets weren't fake. Yes, they were bought off StubHub, which isn't allowed or is frowned upon. It's hard to tell if it's like illegal or not. Like, it's on StubHub. If you search for example, the FC Union website, you can find in small print where it says that they don't support StubHub and these, second ticket sellers or whatever. They have their own way of selling tickets that have been purchased but can no longer be honored for whatever reason. The person can't go for whatever reason. But it was a very strange experience because they wouldn't even scan the tickets from our friends, and they were in the same like batch as the ones that we had scanned successfully. Honestly, if they were there like 15 minutes earlier, probably would have been fine. But this is all to say that if you want to go to a Bundesliga match, if that's part of the reason you want to travel to Germany, do your research beforehand in terms of the best way to get a ticket and if it's even possible to get a ticket. So in Berlin, it's a good example that Union, like I said, has a very small city. They've had a rising fan base. So I was actually emailing with the ticket office, for lack of a better term, and basically came down to where they said, if you are not a member, you cannot come. It's like, okay, well, I guess a little team shop fun day becoming a Union fan isn't happening. Schade. But people are also quick to point out that Hertha, the other big team in Berlin, plays at Olympiastadion, which holds 75,000 people, more or less. I think they cut off some of the higher seats, so it's really, they're only putting in like 40,000 people and cutting it off. But the point is that it's a much bigger stadium. They can hold a lot more people, so it's easier to get a ticket. This might be information that you were thinking about already if you are planning to go to a Bundesliga game while in Germany. You know your team, you know if they have a big fan base, a smaller fan base, how hard it'll be to get tickets. But in general, if you were thinking that you could just get tickets off StubHub or figure it out once you're here, I would think again, just make sure you do lots of research, get your ticket from the club, or try to find a member of the team who's willing to help you out. Ask around. It's going to be a little bit more work than just showing up and getting a ticket like you might for a Saturday afternoon baseball game, to say the least. All right, so let's wrap it up by talking about probably my favorite thing about living in Germany. It's up there 1 and 2 with the trains. I really like the trains, but my favorite thing I would have to say about living in Germany is the access to hiking trails for hiking, trail running, cycling, whatever you want to do. You can get into nature, you can go on little trips, you can get on these long distance hiking trails, you can, hop on the train, get off, go run or hike some of the trails, spend the night somewhere, get back on the trail the next day, hike some more, and then take the train home. Like, we did so many of these kind of weekend getaways out of Dusseldorf when we first moved here. I love that. It's actually one of the things I miss most about living in the Rhineland. But this is to say that there's such a wonderful hiking culture here that you could also use for trail running. It's honestly, God, my favorite thing about living in here. But there's so much I could say when it comes to talking about hiking and trail running in Germany that you better just go watch this video where I break everything down from the trails, how to access trails, the best way to find trails, and some of my favorite long distance hiking trails. So if that's at all interesting to you and you want to know more about hiking and trail running in Germany, then go watch that video.